A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics, for which we are going to talk a bit more about another game that was made by the one and only Bandai Namco. These same guys have made loads of great games over the past several years, and I could talk a lot about them, but I've already done so with a number of them. There was Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, there was Project Cars 3, there were the Dark Pictures games, there was also the not-so-great remake of Pac-Man World known as Pac-Man World Repack. And then, of course, we have this. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Just think, 4 years, going on 5 now, has passed since we got Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. And man, half a decade we've already been through here. The slobbering 20s sure have managed to give us the opportunity to see what the other half could be like. There's a multitude of possibilities of how things could go down. But let's just talk a bit more about Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, which we got more than 4 years after Dragon Ball Z Kakarot's release and eventual success. Of course, we can't forget to mention that Dragon Ball Z's Kakarot's most recent DLC, which is based off of the End of Z saga, with Oob, the good reincarnation of Majin Buu at the end of the Buu saga. After all, the End of Z saga takes place a full decade after the events of the Buu saga. But hey, a few months after that DLC's release came along Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And this, of course, was such a big game. More than that, it was actually an event. A one-of-a-kind piece where Dragon Ball fans and gamers alike all gathered together to basically represent classic Dragon Ball fighting at its most prime, at a recent point in time. A new and cutting-edge console with the capabilities, graphically and performance-wise, like nobody's business. And Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, while it did hold off on its own well for the PS5 as well as other consoles at that time, Sparking Zero was a whole new equation. I will say, one of the biggest things about Sparking Zero compared to Kakarot that most people really appreciated was the combat system. It wasn't like Kakarot where it was all about tapping the button repeatedly, occasionally making combo moves, charging your ki, using healing items, firing ki blasts, moving up and down, boosting. It felt a bit too simple for what it was. But you know what? At the time, I didn't really complain much about the combat. It sure did feel repetitive and a bit wearing on my thumb. But in the case of Sparking Zero, while it does offer up a similar level of repetitiveness, the combat system more than makes up for it. You not only had the basic attacks, but you also had yourself key gauge fill-ups with RT rather than triangle for PS5 players like myself. And if you're doing it on Xbox or other consoles, then the control schemes will be different on that part. But for us PS5 players, while it was triangle for the key gauge in Kakarot, it's RT now. Yeah, the controls are pretty different here compared to Kakarot, and they did take a bit of time getting used to, but the adaptability that I had to it actually made it very easy to work with compared to Kakarot's simplistic setup. And above all that, the battles were incredible. I mean, you had high performance stacked on top of some sick visuals. Incredible visuals by all means. I mean, you had close-ups of the characters charging in towards you, prepping special attacks like Goku's Kamehameha, Vegeta's Final Flash, Piccolo's Special Beam Cannon, or Gohan's Masenko. And all of this stuff just chalks up to the unique visualization of the amazing battles that have taken place over the many years in the history of Dragon Ball from beginning to end. Of course, this mostly does center upon the likes of Dragon Ball Z as well as Super, so we don't exactly get much of Dragon Ball Original, which is something that Kakarot actually explored. Yeah, if you remember the 23rd martial arts tournament, or even the End of Z saga, basically both of those sagas that came before Dragon Ball Z and supposedly after Super, although since at the time Super wasn't around, The end of Z Saga took place 10 years after the Majin Buu saga, and that big gap supposedly has Super in it, leaving only a small portion of it to take place before the supposed end of Z Saga is made to be canon. And maybe it actually could still remain canon. The original end of Z Saga happened years before Super was even a thing. And also, while GT was around. But I almost wondered though, could they actually try their hand at GT once again to supposedly re-canonize it? Who really knows? While GT is not exactly that canon anymore, with a number of things supposedly being borrowed from that series to be implemented in the current canonical events of Dragon Ball, I really wonder, could GT still be made canon nowadays? Maybe they might retell the story so that way it could become canon once again. Especially because of the kind of stuff that Super and all other existing continuities that we've gotten in recent years, even the brand new Superhero from 2022 has kind of pushed GT way off track. So, I don't know what the possibilities of that are going to be like. But hey, I apologize if I got a little off track there. Anyways though, Sparking Zero is mainly set upon as a linear story-paced setting, of which that Goku is made as a playable character. But believe it or not, you actually do get the opportunity to play as other characters. You have Gohan, you have Vegeta, you have Piccolo, and you even have villain characters like Frieza, Goku Black, and Jiren. Yeah, quite a variety of characters to work with. You also get to play as Trunks, especially in the Future Trunks arc. Kind of a shame that they didn't exactly have Future Trunks from where he was able to face against the androids, or where he was able to take on Cell and eventually Majin Buu. Kind of like what Kakarot did for an entire DLC's worth of content. I mean, come on, that was over 3 years prior compared to what we got here in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It's just nothing more than the Future Trunks arc that Kakarot didn't exactly explore, but they probably could have. At least Sparking Zero was able to give us a first-hand look and feel through a game where we could actually get to experience Dragon Ball Super's Future Trunks arc. I guess one minor detail though that I might as well mention. Why is Trunks' hair blue instead of purple? I mean, this is something I've had for a long time now. Why is his hair color different? Why are things different with him nowadays? I don't know. Did he dye his hair blue or something? On purpose? I don't know. This is just something that we don't really need to delve on, because it's not really an important piece of this whole subject. Obviously, I've said before that there's a lot of things about Sparking Zero that are different here. You don't really get to explore the older sagas of Dragon Ball, like Dragon Ball Original, or even the end of Z Saga. It's mostly about the likes of Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super, from the Saiyan Saga to the Tournament of Power. Kind of like how it unfolded in the actual anime, where Z and Super are regarded as the largest portions of canonical events, and the main subject of what most people talk about, even those who create their own scenarios of which that can alter the timeline in this sort of perspective. I mean, you're familiar with Masako X or Salad Saiyan or Carthus Dojo, for instance. They're known specifically for those types of stories. Yeah, lots of things tend to get me off track here. Obviously, while not everything is present here, and it's also unfortunate that you can only go so far with each character, there's only so many fights that some characters get involved with. With Piccolo, for instance, he doesn't exactly become that much of an important subject in Dragon Ball Super, so they technically leave him out of most things. At least he does have his fill for the Tournament of Power, but in the game, he doesn't exactly have all that much to offer. Mostly for the Z Saga he is a part of, especially when it comes down to fighting against Goku, fighting against Nappa and Vegeta, fighting against Frieza, and against Cell, in his imperfect form, of course. but not much else otherwise. Piccolo and his fighting styles were just unique, and his special attacks were very memorable, quite original, kind of like what the Saiyan characters could do. Even Goku and Vegeta, despite some of their attacks being not so original, they still were memorable to us. The Kamehameha and Gallic Gun, for instance, they were well crafted and well made to the point where us kids wanted to do them all the time. Even the infamous Final Flash. But then, of course, we could talk a bit more about some of the other characters involved. There's a story of Frieza, there's a story of Jiren, there's a story of Goku Black. But here's the thing, unlike other Dragon Ball games, they don't exactly give us overall scenarios of which that depict these characters in a form where if they win the fights, then they win the fights. No, the story just carries on as it is, for the characters basically ending up in their own usual fates. Like Frieza being defeated by Super Saiyan Goku, for instance. Or Goku Black being defeated by a combination of Trunks, Vegeta, and Goku. And even Vegito, whom is the Potara fusion of Goku and Vegeta. But of course, one other pro can be added into the mix in order for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero to officially claim its own position on the podium regarding Dragon Ball games from my own personal experience. They brought back the tournament option and can even allow for online matchups. Yeah, similar in a way to how other fighting games have been able to utilize online multiplayer mashups and whatnot. The World Tournament function does in fact allow for other players to come together, even using the same old tournament system. Basically, where it groups up into multiple groupings, where they wiggle it down to one winner. There's also one-on-one matchups that you can make in as well as other fighting styles. A good variety of characters, outfits, transformations, different versions of characters, different dubs of characters, different iterations of characters, and as well as the different maps, locales, and other famous places of which, regarding planet Earth or elsewhere, that Dragon Ball has taken place so far. Even outside of the main timeline, or even otherwise, it has been able to establish their own world, basically. Yeah, if you thought that Xenoverse was crazy enough when it came to putting all this stuff together, well, take a look at Sparking Zero, and you might think differently here. They basically gave us scenarios involving the bad guys, more story exploration, especially outside of the main Dragon Ball Z continuity. I mean, Kakarot didn't even bother going after Battle of Gods or Resurrection F. No, they didn't go for the Universe 6 tournament or any of the other stuff. Not even the Tournament of Power or Goku Black arc. But then again, Sparking Zero came out in late 2024. Basically when several new continuities had come around, especially in the manga series that had come around. The thing is that as of 2020, there has been a number of new chapters in the manga arcs that have been well explored, and we have yet to create media based off of them. There's no anime based off of the likes of Moro or Granola, or even the supposed arc with Goten and Trunks. Yeah, basically pre-Dragon Ball superhero level of all things considered. But when you think about it, I don't know if Sparking Zero would have been the appropriate introduction to introduce these new arcs. Not to mention, with the latest DLCs that we've gotten, they included the new superhero stuff. Gohan basically can go beast nowadays, and even has some unique interactions with the other characters. There's also Orange Piccolo, Gamma 1 and 2, Cell Max. That's basically just a good way to show that superhero is probably the best new arc that we might have. And also, seeing that the movie came out 2 years prior, we only had to have had some sort of game-related release based off of the movie's contents itself. But to be fair, Xenoverse 2 had also gotten DLCs based off of Dragon Ball Superhero's release and success in the box office and by critics. I, of course, was present when they had their limited release run in theaters back in August 2022. And on top of all that, Xenoverse 2 was one of the first ever Dragon Ball games to have had their own inclusion of superhero-related content, especially with the Gammas, Gohan, and Piccolo, and Cell Max. You pretty much get the idea that, as of today, it seems that Dragon Ball Superhero might be the best we have nowadays. There's probably going to be nothing related to Moro or Granola or any of the other arcs that we've gotten. And I'm sure that even Dragon Ball Heroes might not have as much of an inclusion, since that necessarily ain't very canon. But when you get down to it, though, there's actually some inclusions of Dragon Ball GT in there. I mean, we have Super Saiyan 4, we have Pan, we have Goku when he was turned into a kid. There's also Japanese Goku involved in there. What kind of excuse would they have had to not at least include a tiny portion of anything outside of the main timeline that we know of? Like, even Dragon Ball Z Broly was there. Yeah, the Broly that's not exactly canon anymore, as opposed to what we currently have with the 2018 Broly from Dragon Ball Super Broly. That kind of reminds me, though, where exactly is Paragus in all this? I mean, he's probably not really a fighter, but that still would have been a cool idea to include him in the game, at least as a standby. Who really knows? And speaking of Broly and Superhero, where the heck are those elements in the story? Like, Tournament of Power is where it all ended, but technically speaking, since Dragon Ball Super Broly and Dragon Ball Superhero are considered the canon pieces that take place after the Tournament of Power, how come we don't get to explore those in the story? Like, what's going on here? Again, obviously this game ain't perfect for what it is. And arguably, if we were to compare things to Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and Sparking Zero, both games are amazing. They're both made by the likes of Bandai Namco, as well as the likes of Toei and Bird. And they've also gotten themselves some fine cutscenes and fighting action. I will say, Kakarot favors in the cutscenes and cinematics, Sparking Zero favors in the fighting. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot might feel monotonous with the fighting sequences and whatnot, but at least can make up for it with the world exploration, racing with cars, treasure hunting, fishing, and whatnot. Usual RPG stuff that we have nowadays. And Sparking Zero doesn't do a great job in the cutscenes. A lot of times they don't even move. They're like manga panel strips, you know, with text. And I will even go so far to say that the voiceovers they did for it, it's supposed to be better than the previous games, but I will say Sparking Zero does unfortunately not do a great job at it. It's almost like they got paid half the money they did in Kakarot. Maybe because they did. Supposedly Sparking Zero doesn't have as big of a budget in comparison. And because it's a new game, they sold for $60. And Kakarot likely got sold for around a similar price back in 2020. Although nowadays, most of us can buy it at around half price on the PlayStation Store. But hey, there's highs and lows regarding Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And I would even be willing to say they both are of equal scoring from my own matters. If you remember from Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, I gave it a pretty outstanding score for a number of different reasons there. Although Sparking Zero, while the fighting is probably the best prospect of this, not to mention reintroducing the likes of villain arcs, getting to play as villains in general, and of course having the World Tournament as an inclusion in the game itself where we get to play as whatever character we want, that's a really big upgrade in comparison. It does harken back to when the Budokai Tenkaichi series and others did allow for us to also play as whatever character in the franchise we wanted. But Sparking Zero does by far have the biggest inclusion, even going so far to have Broly, Superhero, GT, and other such arcs included with characters all around. I hope that when Dragon Ball Daima becomes big enough, they might start adding characters from that series into the game as well. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how that rolls. Imagine getting to play as little Goku, little Vegeta, little Piccolo. That'd be pretty funny when you think about it. We'll just have to wait and see what they think about it. Bandai Namco ought to keep on rocking, because they're already doing such an amazing job with all the masterpieces they made over the past decade. And so, after all that's said and done with this whole review on the game itself, as well as overviewing all the different pros and cons related to the game itself, and going so far to compare it to Kakarot and how well it did, Sparking Zero also has its own pros and its own cons, which I will say probably doesn't affect the game very much, because having all the pros in mind, like having different arcs to play with, especially the inclusions of the Goku Black arc and Tournament of Power. I don't know why they skipped over Universe 6's tournament in most cases. Even including cutscenes would have been alright. But overall, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero really was more than worth all the excitement. And the fact that everybody was after a copy of this did lead to me unfortunately falling behind, but I will say that as of mid to late December 2024, I thankfully was able to eventually get a copy of it. Quite well, actually. So the overall scoring for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is going to be set at a good 8.8 out of 10.1. So if they had ironed out some of the things that I've mentioned earlier and maybe had some more inclusions within the storyline as well as other things in the game, then it probably would be considered the next best masterpiece after Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Because while it certainly excelled at storytelling and giving us the best possible voiceover work by all the Dragon Ball actors and the best cutscenes they could have provided for any game thus far, I will say the fighting sequences in that whole thing is unfortunately not so great. With Sparking Zero, you have much more flexibility and are even able to pull off combo attacks and special attacks in unique potential ways. Thankfully to the point where it's not really complicated for us players nowadays. So, I do hope that they can do more for the game itself to make it even better. Until then though, we'll just have to wait and see how all that works out. So, thank you very much for watching this piece related to HJN Super Graphics, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with more content.